I'm the next speaker. And I'm Deborah Kahn. I'm Executive Vice President at IMED Central. IMED Central is the largest open access publisher, we think, in many metrics. And I'm going to talk about some practical examples of how openness has impacted research, and so to give some illustrations, and I'll try and be fast. And I want to, before I start, say I'm very, very indebted to Laurie Goodman, who's the editor of GigaScience, whose presentations on this matter I have significantly lent upon with her permission. And in fact, I'm going to add a slide to the presentation to say that for when it goes on the website, because I have, in fact, used her slides. Some of them, not all of them. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of openness in many flavours and how it's extended the impact of research. I like the word that Mike just used, impactability. I think that should become a real word. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I like it. I'll talk about open collaboration, crowdsourcing, open research projects, patient and public involvement in research, which is something very close to our hearts at the moment, and open and collaborative review, and I'll even let Laurie speak to you herself when we're talking about that. So the first example is very much from Laurie. The BGI is the partner in publication of GigaScience, and the BGI has is a Chinese genomics institute, and it has some very, very the ability to do very, very quick analyses of genomes. You may remember there was an E. coli infection in May 2011, and no one really knew what was going on. No one knew where it was coming from. It managed to devastate, I think, the bean sprout industry because people were saying it was coming from bean sprouts. But the first death happened on May 21st, 2011, and there were an awful lot of people getting sick and dying. It became a very, very important public health issue. The BGI completed a draft sequence of the E. coli, of this E. coli, from a sample provided by the doctors on June the 3rd. And then there was a question about what if we publish this data openly, will we actually be able to publish the research later? And there was a real discussion at the BGI about whether or not they should publish the data openly in case it should impact the researcher's ability to publish. That shouldn't be a question that actually exists, but it is still a question that exists. Will you be able to publish openly, or publish your research if you've already published your data? Luckily, the researchers decided that public health was more important than obtaining a publication, and they released the data immediately. And then there was a lot of work crowdsourcing, and Laurie calls this the first tweenome, because the genome was much discussed on Twitter, and the genome community went into overdrive and started working together on this. And they put up a wiki to gather the results, and they found the source, and they managed to create a cure. And in fact, it actually the fact that they had done that work stopped a major public health outbreak and saved a lot of lives, and that was a really important piece of research, and something we should learn a lot about is that, you know, quite often research is life or death, and we shouldn't put our publication processes in the way of life or death decisions, and we should learn from that. I'm not sure that we have yet. And because everybody has to put this picture in our slides today, this was discussed in the Royal Society Science as an Open Enterprise as a very, very important thing that happened, and the bit I put in red says, by opening up their early sequencing result to international collaboration, researchers in Hamburg produced results that were quickly tested by a wide range of experts, used to produce new knowledge and ultimately to control a public health emergency. I think it should say researchers in Hamburg and Beijing, because I think, in fact, the BGI had a lot to do with this. But I think it's a very, very good example of how openness really does help move research forward. Another example which I like a lot is the Ash Dieback, the Open Ash Dieback Hub, which is also crowdsourcing. The problem was there is an aggressive fungal pathogen which causes a range of symptoms and can kill or severely inhibit the growth of the ash tree. And in Denmark, the infection it has infected up to 90% of the ash tree population. It was reported in Britain in 2012, and it was thought that at that point up to 90% of our 80+ million ash trees are under threat. There's no known treatment, so in December 2012, a research group rapidly generated and released genomic sequence data through the website OADB TSL AC UK. And they established two sites, a news and report hub where they could talk about this, but also an open access GitHub repository database to share the data. But the other thing they did is they created a Facebook game, and the reason I wanted to use this example was because this is a way of involving the public in science. It's citizen science, as I might refer to earlier. And so by releasing this Facebook game, they allowed people to start helping with that effort. And I remember listening to it it was being talked about on the BBC, and it got a lot of interest in it when it started. And a couple of years later, the article that was published in bioRxiv openly, talking about what it's the first year report on what has happened. The bit I have circled in red says, our open science and crowdsourcing effort has brought a wealth of new knowledge about this emergent pathogen within a short time frame. Our community endeavour highlights the positive impact that open collaborative approaches can have on fast, responsive modern science. I think in both those examples, working together and openly has really moved things forwards much faster than people working separately and behind closed doors. Another very important example, Jeremy mentioned Matt Todd earlier, there's open source malaria has been a very big part of open research. And this is where malaria compounds made available to see whether people can actually find cures or drugs for malaria. There are a number of things that have been happening there. Open source malaria, pathogen box is a new one that has been made available. Where you won't be able to read this, but it's again another lot of pathogens which have been made available for anyone to research on, anyone to find information that can help move towards cures for some of these very neglected tropical diseases. So there's a lot of work going on with open research moving towards cures for quite significant illnesses, which will make a big difference. The other very, it's a pity Simon de Negri didn't get here this morning, because he would have actually been a very good introduction to this, talking about patient and public involvement in research. This is very, very important and very much in the news at the moment. And it's about research which is being done by and with patients or the public, rather than about, to, or for. And it's about working with patients and the public to make sure that what's being done is relevant to their needs, it's appropriate, and it's effective, making sure it's asking the right questions and using the right processes. And it's now embedded in a lot of these bodies that you can see below. And last week we launched a new journal, which we believe is the first journal that's actually been launched as a partnership between the medical research or the research establishment and the public. And there are two editors, one of whom is a researcher, one of whom is a patient. And all of the articles will be peer-reviewed by a patient as well as by scientists. So it's co-produced by all key stakeholders, including patients, academics, policymakers, and service users. And it's going to focus on making sure that there is engagement in research at all stages. These are the aims of the journal. I'm not going to read them all, but it's the most important thing is that at all times all of the stakeholders are involved in this journal. And it's had an amazing reception. It had an enormous amount of Twitter activity when we launched it last week. It has had already about 30 people get in touch to ask about submitting their papers. Some papers have actually been submitted. It's had about 100 people, nearly 100 people, get in touch to ask to be patient reviewers and to register for that. And that's all in a week. And so and it's had lots of people wanting to interview my colleague Dan, who was responsible for launching it. So he's going to be a media, he says he's going to be on I'm a Celebrity this time, not next year. It's very exciting, and of course this journal has to be open, because the people who are going to read it are not going to have subscriptions. They're not going to have library subscriptions. A lot of the people will be patients, will be carers, will be the public, and they need to be able to access this information. So this is the sort of publication that would not happen in a subscription, or if it did happen in a subscription world, it would not be a good idea. In fact, there was an article published this week about patient involvement in a Sage journal, which I saw a tweet about from Trish Greenhalgh this morning, and you can't get to it because it's behind a barrier. So it's a good example of why we need this journal. And this is the wrong version of my presentation, because hold on one moment. This is where I get Laurie to speak to you, but she's not in this version. Please excuse the blatant advertising at the beginning, but I couldn't work out how to take it out. This is an interview that Laurie did for our journal Biome, or our magazine Biome, which is has interesting things in it. Have a look.
We had a peer review process where one of our reviewers reviewed the paper. We sent the paper back for revision to the authors, and after he submitted his review, suddenly we discovered he had blogged about his review, had provided the information on what he had said in his review, and talked about how he thought, not necessarily the paper should change, but from looking at that paper, how the field should consider future work, and what things he had recommended for changes in the paper. And of course, all the editors at Data Science first were like, whoa, they broke confidentiality, but then we realized that the paper was on a preprint server, which we encouraged. So there was no confidentiality in this paper. But what we found from this is that the reviewer blogged on it, and then someone blogged on the blog which expanded some of the points that reviewer had made. And then there was a tremendous amount of Twitter discussion about the paper. People could access it on the preprint server. And then the authors tweeted that they would be interested in hearing comments from people. As editors, our role then became, we had a peer review process. We selected specific reviewers that we felt were appropriate for this. And as editors, we are obviously not going to be taking into account, for the purposes of publishing their work, all of this Twitter discussion and blogs, but we are encouraging that activity. Suddenly what we had was sort of a crowdsourcing peer review process, and it was not just helpful for the authors in revising the paper prior to publication, but it also provided broad discussion among the community of ways that everybody should think about moving their scientific process forward, about what, now that you've done this, in the future, what directions should we really focus on that are lacking. We found that this crowdsourcing meta review was actually, one, a lot of fun. The authors seemed to enjoy it, the reviewers enjoyed it, and Twitter had a lot of fun with it. And it was probably the first time in the 20 years that I've been publishing that I felt that a review process was constructive rather than antagonistic.
First time in 20 years that she found it peer review process constructive rather than antagonistic. I found that amazing. So open peer review, that's, have I managed to turn this on? No. That, I think, is another of the things which really is making a difference. And this is not only open peer review, this is a discussion about a paper. It's meta peer review, she called it. And so this is just a slide which, again, you won't be able to see the details of, but on the left-hand side, there is a blog which the authors put together about the feedback that they had got through all of that discussion, which created a lot more information about the content of the paper, which was really important. On the right-hand side is the paper they were discussing. It's the paper on the journal site, GigaScience. And as you can see from the article metrics, on the GigaScience site, well, you can't see, but on the GigaScience site, it's had 34,000 total accesses. This is the actual paper. It's had 8 citations from environmental journals, but a lot more from, it has been cited very significantly across a whole lot of journals. It's got an altmetric score of 127, which is quite high, really. It won the Environment Central Research Award last year, but it really has, that sort of discussion has really generated a lot of interest in that paper and has changed the paper and helped the authors change the paper. So another way that impact works. So to conclude, openness is changing the way that research is done, changing the way that we publish and that we make publication available, changes the way that researchers can and will work together, speeds up the process, it allows new collaborations, and allows people to get involved who previously wouldn't have had the chance, like the carers. And this is showing real benefits in public health, but also in many other important areas, and I think it's definitely worth it. So that was me, and then I'd like to invite the other speakers from this session to come up and we can have a set of questions.